Welcome back, everyone, to Red Spotlight. I'm your host, Alexis, and I'm here again once more by myself, and this time, how about a little bit of feeling into it? I apologize, last time I sounded just a bit, well, exhausted and tired, and I don't know what you would expect, considering, of course, as I mentioned just in that particular podcast, that everybody is so freaking busy, including myself, and so it is what it is. Of course, this is the podcast that brings you everything coming out of the world of movies and more. And right now we are, kind of in a holding pattern. There are things moving forward. There are things, obviously, stagnant. And we're still in this little weird time where nothing really that extraordinary is coming out. It's, it's kind of depressing in the context of September, October, well, maybe not so much. Well, actually, yeah. I mean, we're already in October. What? This is October 14th. Jesus. But ever since Ninja Turtles in the first week of August, there's just been like nothing good. And I mean good. I mean like truly worthy of like note of any kind. I know I mentioned the creator in the last podcast, and that was the only new thing I'd seen in theaters, and really the only like new quote-unquote movie that I've seen since Turtles came out in the first week of August. That but then again, I wouldn't call that necessarily great, and much of it isn't very good either. So we've really just been waiting, and originally, of course, we were supposed to be getting Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 2 this month. Of course, with the strikes, that ended up being an impossibility, and so we're now ramping toward, at the time of this recording, we're a week out from Killers of the Flower Moon, and I'm going to talk about, the anticipation behind that later on in this podcast. And so, yeah, just to put it all out there, I'm talking about, where we are right now with the strikes as far as WGA winning and the SAG apparently still not being able to come to any kind of agreement with the studios. I'm also going to be talking about the latest in Oscar season. The awards circuit is underway, and of course all the major players. I know that the last two podcasts I introduced the players, and of course there have been some updates and developments into that, and I want to go ahead and actually give you some tangible names and movies that are going to be, that are already looking to be major players, and maybe even some names that could be considered locks at this point, if you can believe that or not. There's also an update on physical media. Some devastating news coming out from Best Buy and Target, which is really going to dramatically affect the availability for sure of discs, and also the number of people who may now not be able to even get their hands on them, depending on like what is in their area, as well as, Jesus Christ, the collapse of Marvel Studios hits yet another low this week, with Daredevil being completely shut down, and they are starting over from square one. That's going to be our show today on Red Spotlight. This is going to be episode 458. Okay, so to begin with here, and there's so much to say. But I guess if there's a place to start, let's just go ahead and get with the strikes. And it would seem that the writers, I know from outsiders' perspective, the details were not necessarily all that tantalizing, but according to every particular writer, they consider this particular deal a major victory. Unlike what is currently happening with the Screen Actors Guild and what has basically become yet another snag as far as their ongoing, or at this point not going, talks with the AMPTP regarding the issue of AI. And in the last week or so, there was something that came out that was particularly unsettling, that has really, again, thrown another wrench into those negotiations. But as far as the writers are concerned, they were seemingly satisfied with the language that was put down, to the point where at the moment, according to the recent contract, and the WGA has since ratified that apparently, no writer will end up having a writer must be paid for anything that involves AI. And that's a very good thing, as well as the fact that it's going to beef up a lot of writers' rooms. And it's going to actually, I mean, because there were staffing issues where it's come to writers' rooms, and it was also not enough basically resources and infrastructure being put into the sustainability of it all. And as far as job security, that's a major thing as well. This business needs to be just a little bit more, I don't know, or maybe it needs to suck a little less. And that's ultimately what ended up happening just now. So again, you can go to the details and see them on your own if you'd like. But that's generally the gist of it. And every single writer was seemingly happy with it. And I feel like that in turn has had a major impact already. And especially when it comes to the news that came out just this week from Marvel Studios that is completely revamping the way they basically do their television shows. And I also want to emphasize, when I say television shows should be in parentheses, or I should say, no, scratch that. Sorry, this is a late night brain. They should be in quotation marks because they're not actually TV shows, as we've been talking about them for quite some time. This comes in the news from Variety that evidently on the production of Daredevil, what was it called? Born Again? This was supposed to be a quasi-continuation, soft reboot version of the 3-season Daredevil show that was first on Netflix and is currently on Disney+. It was supposed to feature the return of Charlie Cox, Vincent D'Onofrio, and John Bernthal. It was not, however, going to feature the return of fan favorites Karen and Foggy. Those two characters were huge. And it also wasn't going to feature the returning actress for Vanessa. However, the character Vanessa was going to be featured on this show, but with a different actress. And as far as I'm aware of, that's where the casting was concerned. And this show was also not going to feature any returning writers or producers or directors from the original Daredevil run. It featured all new people. However, the show, well, I shouldn't even call them showrunners, but the head writers that were hired for this original Born Again that has now been scrapped, and I'll get into why that was, but their previous work was like over 10 years ago on a USA Network program that I can't even remember the name of. And I recall, especially on the show, and it wasn't just us, a lot of people were doing this, it was heavily criticized as a rather incompetent decision to have those be the people you'd want to do your Daredevil show, especially when you want to follow up the masterwork that we saw on that Netflix run. And then, of course, through the many weeks and months that these strikes have gone on, several different details have come out from people who worked particularly with Disney on why they had a particular habit throughout their entire recent history of retitling certain shows when they would go beyond a third season. I know recently, when it came to people who worked on those Disney Channel shows like Hannah Montana or Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, they had mentioned that it had all basically had to do with Disney not wanting to really pay the actors or the talent any more than they already were being paid for. So they wanted more seasons and episodes of both of those shows, but instead of opting to renegotiate contracts, because that's according to the rules, that's what they would have to do, they instead renamed the series to get around it. which in the case of Hannah Montana, that's why the final season was referred to as, Hannah Montana Forever. And then as far as Sweet Life is concerned, it went from being Zack and Cody to Sweet Life on Deck. And that went on for 3 seasons. So in the case of Daredevil, in the similar vein, they have, if they wanted to do a straight up continuation where they would seek as much of the writers and directors that worked on those seasons, if they wanted to do that, they would have. And they don't want to because they would have to pay all of them much more money than they were being paid for when Netflix was paying them. And so because of how contracts work, and there's no interest in doing that. So that's why, first of all, it's not called Daredevil, it's called Daredevil Born Again. And you need to call it a different show, basically, a different title. So again, that's one of the many reasons that things are the way that they are right now, or at least when it came to Daredevil. And well, we all kind of had a strong suspicion that the quality was going to be rather disastrous because the recent track record of shows has been shitty. The recent track record of films have been god awful. And it's been years now. There's seemingly no interest in wanting to change the way and how they make their stuff, at least until now. But before, we were rather confident in the idea that this is a disaster waiting to happen, and once again, we've been proven right. There was even over the weekend, I saw some person in Marvel was saying that they, in-house at Marvel Studios, were rather confident in the idea that Quantumania, the recent Ant-Man and the Wasp film, was great. And that should tell you just about all you need to know about, the kind of people that are working at Marvel. If they felt that film was genuinely great, then that does not bode well for literally anything else that they feel confident about. And to be sure, if they felt that Quantumania was something to write home about, I really do shudder to think how terrible this Daredevil show was, to the point of them having to completely shut it down and start all over, which, to be sure, isn't necessarily the first time that this has happened. Now, part of the problem is this has happened many, many times, but this is the most public it's been, maybe because it does feature, really popular characters and actors, but it also is a change in the wind when clearly Marvel wanted to communicate out to people that Kevin Feige himself felt personally that the quality was simply not there. Again, this is the same man and this is the same team that put out schlock like She-Hulk and Secret Invasion and Quantumania. It's like, really? You picked a hell of a time to care about quality, right? That also, by the way, should oh my goodness. It's incredible to me, right? Like, this seemingly coming at a time where honestly, I think that the reality is, in addition to the strikes happening, of course, there's just no other way to deny it. Like, literally, with Disney crumbling and Marvel Studios themselves really just being starved for anything successful or anything that's really good, it's kind of come to a point where it's just so unbelievably undeniable. And of course, not the least of which to mention, really, that their own in-house VFX people and those that have worked with them are now going under the process of unionization and a strike for that situation is seemingly all but inevitable. So things are really coming down to a crunch here in a way that, again, it's just life comes at you fast and it hits you pretty hard in ways that even would surprise the rest of us. And personally, I feel like all these are good things because they needed a kick in the teeth. They really did, and I'm sorry to say, but in some ways, it may be a situation of too little, too late. Now a lot of people were focusing on the idea that Daredevil didn't put on his costume to the fourth episode. Those people can go straight to hell. And by the way, I don't mean the people on the show that made that decision. I mean the people who think that's a problem in the first place. I don't give a shit about a costume. That's not why I choose to watch a show. And if it's something that you decide is a major thing in the show, you need to seriously reevaluate what your priorities here and what matters most in the story. That's not the most important thing that came out. The most important thing that came out that was seemingly pretty disastrous was this idea that the first episode of this new show was going to kill off two major characters from the old show. They were going to be shot and killed. Karen and Foggy. I genuinely don't know what to say to that. That is one of the worst ideas I've ever heard. And it really does communicate to me that Kevin Feige is just simply out of his depth. Because from what I heard, that was a Marvel decision. That was a Kevin Feige decision. And he's not going anywhere. Now that's the man that, for whatever reason, people think is the best thing ever. Okay, sure. Continue believing that. But anywho, it was so bad. They had filmed 4 or so episodes. Everybody on that show is fired now. The head writers, all that is done. And going forward, what's going to happen with not just this show, but all the remaining shows, is they're going to apply the basics of traditional television, which a lot of these practices are so, as a matter of fact, and honestly, stuff that you'd think that they would be doing this entire time. But when you get into reading, you realize, oh yeah, they actually weren't doing it the whole time. And all of us were pointing it out in real time that they weren't doing it because it came across that way in the quality of all of these shows. And it really is really kind of an insult to television to really call them shows in the first place. This critique of them being, made to feel like long movies, well, it turns out it was correct the entire time, because going forward, what they're going to do now is, for one, instead of having head writers, they're going to have showrunners. Well, what's the difference? Well, with what Marvel Studios was doing is they were having the head writers write the show, and then the head writers would have no involvement when the directors would come in and film it. Whereas the directors in traditional TV, and by the way, what makes this so stupid is that they had people who did this stuff, who knew the basics. They had Marvel Television. That was the division that was run by Jeff Loeb under the Ike Perlmutter side of Marvel. And I understand we all wanted Ike Perlmutter gone. Sure. You don't necessarily have to invite Jeff Loeb to come back. And I think he didn't want to work with Kevin Feige anyways. Sure. But you had a whole TV unit. And I and Peter were saying this from the very beginning, back in 2019, when the Marvel Television was dissolved basically, and they announced the Disney Plus shows under Marvel Studios, Kevin Feige really would have saved himself so much trouble if he had just utilized those TV executives and that entire unit of operation into doing those shows. That didn't necessarily mean that he needed to relinquish control. He very well could have just delegated it to them and then just, dictated remotely, which is what he insists on doing for everything, But they're going to have showrunners now. They're going to actually film pilots to see if it's any good before they decide to spend any more money on it, which is incredible. And they're actually going to have a show Bible now, which features, it's a rule book of what to do and what don't to do and what rules apply to this particular show, which again, you'd think they would do, but the problem is Marvel Studios just treated these as longer movies and used the same approach to them as they did to their films. And I think the quality really does speak for itself in what it ultimately ended up being, right? Because what you have, look, the situation with Secret Invasion ultimately calls, what we're talking about here, because they filmed the whole show and then they weren't happy with it. So they fired those writers, brought some other people in, and filmed it again. And that is why the budget, and I forget what the figure was, but the budget was astronomical. This was a 6-episode miniseries on Disney Plus. It was in the $200 or so $100 million area. It was just a disaster. And there was also some rumors that were going around that part of why Marvel wanted variety, or because these things don't happen by accident. Of course, Marvel wanted this to get out in some way, even though it made them look even. They look terrible here, obviously, in this story. But there was even some rumors going on that they're really, 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 really nervous about the performance of The Marvels coming out in theaters in November. I don't really know if we're going to cover that film, if I'm being honest with you. No one on our team is interested, not even remotely, in that film. So, and as far as Daredevil is concerned, again, it's not an altogether bad thing that Kevin Feige realized that it wasn't working and that there was a problem. But that doesn't really instill any confidence that he has any capability in producing anything that he hasn't already done. So I'm not holding my breath out for this show. And I'm sorry to say, I actively root for it to fail because I'm not interested in another decade of Marvel dominance. I happen to really stand with Marty Scorsese, and I feel like comic book films, I'm at a point now where, and I truly am shocked to say this because I definitely wouldn't have said this even 3 years ago, but I'm at a point where I agree with him wholeheartedly, not in his whole, I've already gone over what his original comments were, and I always agree with him, but even more so, I'm a little bit more militant now in that they need to be stopped in that they don't become the only thing that our culture values as far as cinema is concerned, because that's just a ridiculous thing to think that they're the only ones that should be cherished or appreciated or valued or even successful. And this year, it's amazing to me that, it hasn't really been covered as much, but when you look at the performances overall, my rule of thumb this year was, if you're a comic book film and if you're anything less than exceptional, people are done with you. And the two cases that they were exceptional, with Guardians 3 and Across the Spider-Verse, those films were very successful. All the other ones were not exceptional, and some were quite bad. And we saw the results where people are kind of done, and people are tired of this, and I think they are beginning to see that. And I hope, they don't hope this, but I hope that people end up moving on from this and choosing to see other kinds of stories and genres in movie theaters. So that's ultimately my hope for it. So I don't necessarily have anything that would get me to care for Marvel to succeed. In fact, I hope they don't. So there's that. On the other side of this, I happen to really find it hilarious to me how there continues to be no love lost between all of the Marvel Studios people and the people specifically who were working on the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. team, because a few weeks ago there was this story that came out. I guess it was like, this isn't, I don't know why the story came out there, but Joss Whedon in an older, I guess it was Joss Whedon. It wasn't himself, but it was people that were close to him. And the article were saying that that they were told by Joss Whedon that at the time of making or filming the pilot for S.H.I.E.L.D., there were people at Marvel Studios that were very against the idea and would rather have had him devote his time to another movie. And Joss Whedon, of course, directed The Avengers, Age of Ultron, which evidently was very contentious, and he was having a lot of creative issues with them in the midst of reshoots. At the same time, he was brought in to do rewrites and oversee reshoots, I guess, for Thor: The Dark World, and then of course he was doing this Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. pilot. And Kevin Feige basically was like, you do your own thing, you do you, I don't care. That wasn't the words that he used, but I'm paraphrasing. That's very much how I came across. Is like, yeah. So that was strange to me, although pretty believable when you consider the fact that the show just never really was acknowledged by any of those people. And so, and recall that years and years ago, I want to say this was 2016, Chloe Bennett herself at some convention was just flat out said, Marvel doesn't care about our show. And it's hilarious to me how that sentiment continues to be expressed throughout literally everybody involved in the series. As the story of Daredevil and the shuffling at Marvel Studios and how they do TV shows got out, a number of the people who were on that team really came out and were like, yeah, this is like, I mean, basically trolling them and throwing shade. I know the Zuckerman sisters, who were part of the writing room, and Drew Greenberg, of course, wrote a number of episodes. All of them did. Greenberg particularly wrote one of the best episodes of S.H.I.E.L.D. that was the one that was directed by Henstridge, As I Have Always Been, from the wonderful 7th season. And the shade was flawless. It was hilarious. One of them, by the Zuckerman, was like, wow, imagine them actually like doing TV shows, as if it was a hard thing to do, which they of course did for 7 years. Mark Kolpak himself, who is the VFX supervisor on the show, and even Bear McCreary, who was the composer for the series. And Bear McCreary doesn't really comment too much on this, but it was pretty interesting to see from him. And his comments were, I don't have them in front of me, but like he referred to their show, S.H.I.E.L.D., being treated as like the ugly duckling by everybody else at Marvel. And it's like, I mean, if everybody on S.H.I.E.L.D. feels the same way as us S.H.I.E.L.D. fans do, as like how they've been treated, then it's not imaginary. No one is making this shit up. Like, and the thing is, everybody knows this has always been the case. These are not imagined slights. Like, for real, this show has just been continuously ignored. And I'll admit, yes, for many years it was frustrating. It's just gone to the point now where it's just funny to me and petty, and I don't quite understand why that is or where that comes from, but it seemingly is what it is. But I'll just say this. I think Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the legacy of that show it has come around a little bit faster than I would have thought it was, but it's going by a little bit slowly but surely. I am seeing it very much in how the press covered it at its 10th anniversary this past month, the 10th anniversary of its first episode that aired in September of 2013. And a lot of the reviews are like, this show was actually good, and Marvel can learn a lot from it and its structure now with its Disney Plus shows. And a lot of them were like saying like, wow, the Disney Plus shows are just like, they don't hit as well as S.H.I.E.L.D. did. And even Peter, when I was talking to him off air, was like saying, he told me that he came across an article by one of them, by one of the trades, not the trades, one of the smaller sites, and he was so convinced that I had written it, which, I wouldn't put it past me to write, but he'll give you an example, and this is one of the bigger ones. The Ringer is a huge outlet. The Ringer, which, covers a lot of movies, they also cover NFL, NBA, whatever they do. I don't know who they are. I don't know those people. But as far as The Ringer, of course, the Big Picture podcast comes from them. That's their outlet. But they also do a lot of great covering of the entertainment industry. And then Jomi, man, I hate it when I can't pronounce a person's name. Jomi Aden Aaron, ADENIRAN. There you are. This is what the headline was. What Marvel TV could learn from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. on its 10th anniversary. The current era of Marvel on Disney Plus has been inconsistent, to say the least. Maybe it is time to go back to basics and learn from Phil Coulson and company. I can't express to you people how good that makes me feel reading that headline, because this is basically what it's not just like vindication in the sense of like, well, these Marvel TV shows in these last 2 or 3 years have been, very underwhelming. It's not really just about that. It's more so about the legacy of the series, and that's what I've been most concerned about. Is like, I know that in one of the things that was being said was, and hilariously, we now have this wonderful video from Martin Scorsese, thanks to his daughter Francesca, putting on TikTok about like all these different like these new slang terms, and one of the ones that she was quizzing him on was like slept on, and how the King of Comedy was slept on, and more on that later on in the show. But this show, in real time, many of its fans are saying, yeah, it is just being so slept on. But it's the truth. The quality of the show was far greater than, first of all, it had any right to be, and far greater than, I don't understand where 2013 was a weird, interesting time in the film space. In particular, the film media space was exploding and growing. At that point, you still had AMC Movie Talk, and I think, honestly, a lot of people's expectations for this show set them up for failure. It didn't help that this was a network TV show, and they were expecting movie quality stuff, which was ridiculous. Again, that's expectations going out of whack. But it also didn't help that in the time of these rising, movie media outlets like Collider, at that point AMC, and then at that point Screen Junkies, were very negative on the show at first, and then never talked about it ever again. And let me just go ahead and read this article here. Just over 10 years ago, on September 24th, 2013, Real Cinema premiered on ABC. Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was the studio's first attempt at expanding the Marvel Cinematic Universe from movie theaters to the small screen. The initial rollout was far from perfect. Erratic breaks in the programming schedule led to the series airing of just 6 episodes over 3.5. That was, oh my God, I'm telling you, when you live certain things and then years later they write stuff about it and then they bring stuff that you forgot and it just brings you right back. They did this shit. I remember this. This was like from episodes 11 to like 15, or 11 through 15 or 16. And they spread that shit out, probably because of Winter Soldier, honestly. But it was just like, who could keep up? This is part of why the ratings were kind of declining in that first season as well, was because you would never know when it was on. It would be on a Tuesday, sure, 8 o'clock, but you'd never know when it would be on, when you go 1 week on and 1 week off. It was a mess here. If fans kept watching live after that, they deserve financial compensation. I would definitely be a proponent of that. Still, even with that disruptive opening season, S.H.I.E.L.D. developed a small but loyal fan base. Those viewers would help keep the series on television for 7 years and 136 episodes, making the show the longest running and arguably most successful program developed by Marvel. I want to stop right there. Just this week, and I saw it on the Reddit, on the S.H.I.E.L.D. Reddit, but, I'm always looking out for new reactors. I love video reaction channels like Blind Wave and Normies. And by the way, both Blind Wave and Normies have great reactions to this show and are big fans and proponents of the quality and legacy of the series. So definitely check those out. But I'm always on the lookout for new ones, because I like to rewatch the show, but I want to rewatch it with a different perspective, obviously. And I was reading the chats, as they say, about like, oh, real quick, Jamie Jirak, I love her. She just has a new podcast called Love in the Time of Hydra, where she is literally watching the show again, but this time with her boyfriend, and he had never seen it, and so it is, and they're having guests on, and it's just a really cool podcast after show, in a way, on the series, and I think it's great, and it adds some really cool insight of people who are watching it for the first time, and then people who are rewatching it again. So please check that out. They're not paying me, but I would gladly simp for them anytime, as I do for this show. But I was reading on Reddit, one of the reaction channels, as a matter of fact. Their name is, I forget his name. I just really saw his stuff this week, but the channel's name is OMN1 Media. That's OMN1 Media. And a lot of the stuff that he was saying was like, guys, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm really enjoying this show. And he's just done the first like 9 or 10 episodes of season 1. And mind you, this is the point of the show that is undoubtedly the weakest of the entire series. But like I've been saying myself, when I rewatch those season 1 episodes, there's a lot of character development and a lot of choices made in those episodes to really focus on getting you to care about the people and the characters on this team. And in the midst of so much behind the scenes chaos, and again, when you go back and read some of those interviews from Jedmo, that's Jed Whedon and Marissa Tanchero, and the showrunners of the show, they admit that they were just like stalling until they can get to episode 16 when the Hydra reveal would come into it. So it's amazing to me how you have people who are watching the show for the first time that are coming away from the different perspective of like, well, as a matter of fact, I don't feel like my time is being wasted here. And I'm going to go ahead and play, because I was, and because I can. And feel free to skip this if you don't want to hear this. I'm going to play some comments that he said. And also, please check out those reactions. They're really cool. And let me just go ahead and get the video out for you. Give me 1 second, and here it is.
Really good first season. I find myself always being like, a lot of times if I'm recommending a show, I know the first season is usually a little slow. And honestly, I've seen it from some of your guys' comments even, like saying that, the first season's a little slow, but I promise it gets real good later. I'm just sitting here like, this is I was literally thinking throughout this episode, I was like, this is, like, I know we're only 7 episodes in, and there's still like 10 plus episodes left of this season, but at this point, I'm sitting here, I'm like, this is probably one of the best first seasons I've seen in a long time. I don't feel that need here. I'm having a really good time with each one of these episodes and seeing how they unfold, how they unravel, how well they're written, the themes and the performances that are tackled throughout everything, the cinematography, the music, the banter, the dialogue, just in general, the shenanigans they get up to, and just the way they've built this camaraderie and this unit. I just feel like it's all been pretty good. Honestly, if I had to say what the weakest episode to me so far has been, if I had to pick one, it would be the one with Coulson's old mentee, with her eye. That was probably the weakest episode so far of all of this. And I still had fun with that. With these 20-some episode seasons, it's kind of impressive that up until this point, that's the biggest critique or negative that I could say about it so far. See more and more how, passionate people would be if you loved this show, and how, they straight showed footage from Dark World to then never be recognized by the actual MCU itself and basically just always ignored. God, I don't know half how much that frustrating that could be, but I'm starting to get it. I'm starting to really get it. We had a little bit of that with the Daredevil stuff, but it didn't really go it didn't even try half this hard to do it. It was very content in being separate and really only ever mentioning the incident in New York. And they never named anybody. They never really said too much outside of referencing that the thing happened. I think they maybe name dropped a few people here and there, but that's it. It was always nicknames of things. It's never really anything more than that. But this had this direct, they are trying their best to play within the bounds of the MCU, and Kevin Feige's just over here being like, oh, what? No.
Yeah. Basically, that's how it's been like. So, ultimately, I feel pretty good about myself. I feel pretty good about, the show getting a second wind. At the same time, it feels even sweeter to see the Marvel Studios ship just crash and burn and sink. And I don't know. The truly vindictive are as patient as saints, as the soon-to-be Academy Award nominated performance said in Oppenheimer earlier this year. So that's some good news and some otherwise shitty stuff that's come out and come to light. So yeah, it's kind of hard to see where we can. Oh yeah, well, speaking of shitty news, I don't know what to say that would put this in a positive light other than, well, if Best Buy is seriously going to get out physical media and movies, at least people who care enough to buy that won't get banged up steelbooks in their mail anymore. At least we won't have to deal with employees literally using a staircase or TVs to block stands anymore. And at least we won't have to endure any more of the shrinking real estate space that are on their sales floor with physical media. So there are some positives here, but of course it's all pretty bleak in the idea that they're done. It's not surprising in the least. The signs have been there. But when you mix this with Target also, not pulling out completely, but they will be in select stores. It is incredibly depressing and also just strange when you consider the idea that Disney themselves has only just reinvigorated their output for physical media releases. in putting their Disney Plus shows out on media. So it just leaves us in a weird space. Um, it is quite devastating, honestly, and a lot of us here have been quite angry about this eventuality for a long time now. Um, I don't really know if this is something that will ever really be over, or we could get over. But I mean, we'll try. I wish I could say more, but I don't really know what to say here. I don't know where this is gonna go, and I'm kind of afraid where it'll leave us. So I'm just gonna leave that there for now. However, if you're fans of physical media, continue, of course, to support it wherever you can find it. Now, I recently just, especially Criterion, will continue to have releases. I just, a few weeks ago, did a pre-order for the Del Toro Pinocchio film, which, of course, was a Netflix movie, and there's no physical version of it, so they're doing their own. And it's an amazing cover, and it was an instant pre-order. Yeah, $50. I don't care. I want it. I need it. I'm gonna have it. And then, um, they've been doing a lot of Scorsese stuff lately, particularly from the 70s and 80s. I know that earlier this year they put out After Hours with an amazing cover. They're gonna put out Mean Streets pretty soon. And I'm personally rooting for Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore to have its own release because that was an amazing film, which I'll go ahead and get into that now. I've been kind of, with the absence of really good material these last 2 months, 2.5 months really, I've been kind of like, diving deeply into certain filmmakers that I know are going to have new releases later this year. Filmmakers that I've had already such reverence for and, prior experience in the past. And that would be Marty Scorsese and Hayao Miyazaki. Although Marty Scorsese had a bit more familiarity with his filmography before. Years ago in 2019, we did a Scorsese Files series with me and Peter, and we did a number of films that were kind of linked together thematically. Well, we did certainly that was just basically scratching the surface. It was a whole other half of his filmography that was radically different. That I didn't get a chance to really dive into until now. And then with Miyazaki, it was just like the one. And then, I know I've been documenting this as I go on the show here, but it started with seeing Mononoke and Porco Rosso in theaters because Studio Ghibli Fest, and then I went and just saw the rest of my own on Max. The most recent of which being Howl's Moving Castle, which was amazing. And of course, he's gonna have Boy and the Heron, his 11th feature film, I think, or actually his 12th feature film, out sometime this year. And then of course Scorsese has Flower Moon literally coming out next week. So I've been watching literally all their stuff in the last 2 months. I'd seen Mononoke, Porco Rosso, The Wind Rises, Ponyo, Totoro, Kiki's Delivery Service, Nausicaa, Valley of the Wind, Castle in the Sky, and of course Howl's Moving Castle. And then with Scorsese, I recently, for the first time, experienced After Hours, Color of Money, Kundun, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, The Last Waltz, Who's That Knocking at My Door, and I just finished watching The Aviator. So all of those movies, oh, and The Age of Innocence, all of that was just not something that I had seen before. And so it has really just been, I don't know, it's been cool because I've kind of curated my own personal film festivals these last 2 months in the absence of something truly worthwhile at the theaters. I mean, when you're watching movies, it's Howl's Moving Castle and Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore and After Hours, I feel like I've won. Because I can't say that all the films that I saw were gripping and engaging. Um, but I've liked pretty much all of them. And I think I've come away with some films that I will continue to watch the rest of my life. So that's a pretty big win. But for Scorsese, I would definitely say that it just further grows my love and passion for this guy and this filmmaker. And it this whole back half of films that I had not seen before just further enriches the tapestry of his filmography. And it's really reductive to me when people really just like size him down as a guy that just makes crime and gangster movies. And a lot of those films, a lot of his movies are that. To be fair, though, there's a lot more going on in those films than just being that. But he's a really diverse filmmaker. Like After Hours, King of Comedy, New York, New York, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, Age of Innocence, Kundun, The Last Waltz are literally so Hugo. There's so many they're so different from each other, and very uncharacteristic of what people would think of, him as a filmmaker. Although, to be fair, a number of those movies I just mentioned haven't really been seen. And, really to kind of like to document my process, a lot of those films are really hard to track down and find, like, to see. A number of them I had to like literally rent, which I don't usually do. There are, particular sources you go and you find ways to see certain things, right? We all know what I mean. No, not even there. It was hard to find certain things. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I was like gripped or, thrilled by all of what I saw. There were a number of films that I would say I appreciated the craft. I appreciated, I see the brilliance in the directing going on here, but I wasn't necessarily like gripped by Kundun or Who's That Knocking at My Door, or even The Color of Money, especially, where, there were moments in all those films where I was quite bored because I didn't really care about much of what was going on there. But on the flip side, you have movies like The Aviator and After Hours and Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore and The Last Waltz, which are like, wow, just grade A filmmaking and movies that I'm gonna and have continued to stick with me weeks after having originally seen them. So all of which is to say, I hope that Marty has a great awards season. I am expecting there to be a lot of moments where he is being celebrated, and I'm sure he's going to get a lot of nominations. Unfortunately, what is happening already and what is going to continue to happen is the conversation that is going to be elicited from his film in a lot of circles is going to be diminished to its overall chances. And while I agree that this is the kind of movie that's going to get a lot of nominations and not necessarily get any wins, I don't think that's the extent of how we should be talking about a Marty Scorsese film. Because there were a number of channels that I saw in the last week or so that basically reduced this to the Fabelmans talk, which was, oh, I don't even know why we're talking about this. Like, we know it's going to get nominated, but it's not going to win anything, so. Yeah. Like, there were, and as far as, it was the same phrasing, like, what is this even doing here? And I'm like, well, maybe because it's a great fucking movie. And yeah, I guess from your perspective of being a prognosticator, it's not all that relevant to discuss the film, but still, to receive 10 nominations and not get a single win, well, let's be real. It is par for the course for, I guess, Scorsese and Spielberg. I really do wonder, though, like, yes, both of them are getting up there in age now, but they still continue to make great movies. And little by little, the Academy makeup is changing. The voters themselves they're doing these. I guess the younger ones are catching up now, because I feel like if this was like 5 or 6 years ago, movies like Fabelmans and Killers of the Flower Moon would be sweeping, particularly if not entirely based on who made those movies. Um, so yeah, I mean, if anything, like I told Peter, I hope that somebody out there decides to give Scorsese a directing prize, because he's 80 years old and I'm sure he made a great film. I'm going to be seeing it this coming week, but the guy really doesn't get enough credit. I know, like, he is considered the best filmmaker, and like 3 of his films are considered the best films of like the individual decades, but it really says a lot that so many of his movies were hard to find. And a lot of, because I don't just watch the films, I also watch whatever I can find on YouTube, and do my own research on like how the films are received, and takes on the films and how they've aged and how they were received in their original like release. And it just goes to show you, so many of his movies were failures and flops and bombs, and not really seen that much then, and even less now. So getting his name out there and giving him an award of some sort means a lot, for sure. This is a guy that's only really won once for directing at the Academy. I know he's not going to win at the Academy, because Nolan's going to win that one in a cakewalk. But since the Globes, did give Spielberg for Fabelmans over Daniels or anybody else there for directing, the Globes, I think, and their whole presence in this, I hope results in like different kinds of winners. I know from a lot of the prognosticators get on my nerves, because like all they care about are their predictions, and so like, and even that seems a bit personal, like to put, maybe a bit egregious to say, but it's true when you want the same winners at every single thing. And I feel the purpose of like different award shows, and especially the number of them that we have, is the result in different winners. And I was one of the few voices that was saying back earlier in January that I knew this didn't really mean anything in terms of like Everything Everywhere sweeping, but it was nice to have the recognition for those films, particularly Fabelmans and Banshees, which went on to basically be ignored by everybody else. So a lot of people were like, belittling it, saying it doesn't matter, and like, what does it even mean? And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, but I think this past award season was one of the best, because it's one of the few seasons where genuinely every show resulted in a different kind of winner. So, and considering what this particular crop of films look like this year, I would hope we're in for some of that, because I genuinely feel like I'm going to enjoy a lot of them and would want a lot of them to win, particularly, of course, Scorsese. And I feel like if anyone out there is going to give Scorsese something, it would be the Globes. The Globes themselves, I believe, have already given him 3 or 4 wins in directing, the last of which being Hugo. By the way, in comparison to the Academy only giving him 1 directing prize. So, maybe it's just dumb luck, but I've always appreciated the Globes for awarding deserving people that are different and ultimately not what pans out at the Oscars. But I appreciate those people being given their time as well. So, like movies like, I believe it was Boyhood, Grand Budapest Hotel, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, West Side Story, they had their time to shine at the Globes, and they didn't get that at the Oscars. So that to me has an inherent sense of value, and I would really wish that people wouldn't dismiss them as much as they do, because yeah, they were a corrupt institution. Yeah, they were racist, but guess what? So is everybody else. Not to the extent that they were, clearly, but come on, let's not kid ourselves here. But speaking of like where we are and the crop, I want to say about what's going on with the award season. I feel like At the top of my head, what are the 10 likeliest movies right now in October that are looking like will get a Best Picture nomination? Well, you have Oppenheimer, you have Barbie, you have Killers of the Flower Moon, you have The Holdovers, you have Poor Things, that's 5 already. With 6, I am going to add in, well, this is tricky here, but I'll add in Past Lives. I'm going to add in The Color Purple, even though no one has seen it, but it's kind of it's a stand-in. I've heard it's good and the performances will be nominated, so we're going to go ahead and go in. It's a musical, so I'm going to leave a space in for that. And then as far as the other 3 films are concerned, it can be American Fiction, which no one has seen to an extent except for the people at TIFF, and it won the People's Choice Award at TIFF there. So that gets us up to around 8, I want to say. And then if we look at, oh yes, Maestro just opened. So what I have here is, well, personally, I have a list here on Letterboxd about like the 10 films that I would love to see nominated. This list featured a lot of the ones that I just mentioned, plus Boy and the Heron and Across the Spider-Verse. I haven't seen Boy and the Heron, but how cool would it be to have a Hayao Miyazaki movie like be a major player or just like a major name included in this list? And of course, Across Spider-Verse is still to me the best movie of the year. But they're animated, and these people are pieces of shit, and they don't consider animation a medium that comes close to the validity they place on live action. So because that is what it is, it ain't necessarily going to happen. Probably won't happen there. But Maestro for sure, American Fiction, and I believe that last one would be Anatomy of a Fall, are the ones that I'm thinking are the likeliest movies for a picture nomination. As far as director is concerned, that one is still a little bit open-ended as far as like what the overall nominees would be, but we're all agreeing that it's Marty Scorsese for Killers, it's Christopher Nolan for Oppenheimer, and then after that, it could be a lot of different options. I would also put in there Yorgos Lanthimos for Poor Things, Greta Gerwig for Barbie, and then that 5th one could very well be Alexander Payne for The Holdovers, because, I mean, just to be clear, both Poor Things and The Holdovers have been really rising up in a lot of rankings and estimations these past few weeks, and so I think that could be your top 5 there. And as far as like performances, be on the lookout for Leonardo DiCaprio, Robert De Niro, and Lily Gladstone from Killers being nominated. Look for Paul Giamatti, Divine Joy Randolph, maybe even Dominic Sessa from The Holdovers to be nominated. From Poor Things, in contention, we have Emma Stone, Mark Ruffalo, and Willem Dafoe. He's very much on the outside, but Barry Keoghan for Saltburn is going to get a lot of attention for sure. From The Color Purple, we have 3 well, maybe even 4. We'll see. I mean, Fantasia, Taraji B. Henson, and Danielle Brooks are the ones that are being considered for nominations. Perhaps, maybe even Jeffrey Wright for American Fiction, although no one is really... There's not much that has come out of that yet. From Oppenheimer, you would think Robert Downey Jr., Emily Blunt, and Cillian Murphy. Bradley Cooper and Carey Mulligan from Maestro. By the way, a lot of these films already Best Picture contenders. And Ryan Gosling for Barbie. Maybe Margot Robbie for Barbie, but that's not looking the best. Maybe Greta Lee for Past Lives, although of course that's not looking the best, although Past Lives certainly has a shot at a screenplay nomination. Poor Things, Killers, Maestro, Holdovers, Barbie, all those movies definitely up for screenplay nominations. But the general makeup, moving beyond, those acting performances, as far as techs are concerned, we're looking at Oppenheimer cleaning up here. And I guess in the coming months, we're going to see like who's going to challenge that film for those kind of awards, like, sound and cinematography and editing. We may have a very interesting race when it comes to best song. I understand that The Color Purple has an original song they're going to submit, so that'll be interesting. I'm hoping that Barbie does submit the 3 songs, like Dance the Night, What We Made For, and I'm Just Ken. And we'll see how that goes. So yeah, that's kind of where we are. I mean, there are some other films that are being talked about. I'll just put out there my personal list of movies that I'm interested in. Beyond what was already mentioned. So Saltburn, Anatomy of a Fall, Napoleon, Hitman, Zone of Interest, All of Us Strangers, Freud's Last Session, which is from Sony Pictures Classic and is going to be with Anthony Hopkins. So hello, let's not forget about that. The Taste of Things, that's a French film. Dream Scenario with Nicolas Cage, The Killer, the latest from David Fincher, Rustin with Coleman Domingo, Origin by Ava DuVernay. Still curious about Wish and Nimona, 2 animated films. I still haven't seen Elemental, hilariously enough. Wonka, I'm very curious to see. There's even a new one by Mads Mikkelsen called The Promised Land. And there's also a number of like Wes Anderson short movies that are currently available right now to stream on Netflix if you're interested. So yeah, that's where we are right now. As far as an update is concerned about those films, and we will be talking about as many as we can when they come out. But that's going to go ahead and do it for us today. For this short little podcast. Thank you all for listening. And again, you can listen to our podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts, Apple Music, Spotify. Even catch us on YouTube. Of course, we just did a recent recap series on the Ahsoka show, which we had many, many things to say about that. So, yeah. This time next week, I will be dropping, hopefully, my review for Killers of the Flower Moon on the next podcast. So we will see you then under our spotlight. Until then, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.